The dust from the stranger's horse settled in the middle of Main Street just as Rebecca Harper was lifting a crate of supplies from the general store's porch. And when she looked up to see who had arrived in Buffalo, Wyoming on this sweltering July afternoon in 1876, her blood turned to ice water in her veins. Thomas Hendrick sat astride a black gelding, a coiled rope hanging from his saddle horn, and the set of his jaw told her everything she needed to know about why he had come. She set the crate down with trembling hands, her calico dress suddenly feeling too tight across her chest as she struggled to draw breath. 3 years had passed since she had fled Kansas in the dead of night with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small amount of money she had saved from selling eggs. 3 years since she had signed the divorce papers that a circuit judge had finally granted her after documenting the bruises, the broken ribs, the terror that had been her daily existence. 3 years of building a new life in this small Wyoming town, working honest jobs, making friends, finding peace. And now Thomas was here, with a rope that she knew was not meant for cattle. Her landlady, Mrs. Chen, appeared beside her, the older woman's weathered face creasing with concern. "Rebecca, who is that man?" "Someone from my past," Rebecca managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone I hoped would never find me." Thomas dismounted slowly, deliberately, his boots hitting the dirt with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the street. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps fear was making him seem that way. His face had new lines around the mouth, a hardness in his eyes that had always been there but now seemed more pronounced. He wore a gun belt low on his hips, and the rope swayed slightly as he moved. "Rebecca," he called out, his voice carrying that false pleasantness that had always preceded violence. "I've come a long way to bring you home where you belong." She took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the porch railing to steady herself. "I am home." "You have no claim on me anymore, Thomas. The law said so." His laugh was cold and brittle. "The law? You mean some Kansas judge who listened to your lies? A man has a right to his wife, and no piece of paper changes that in the eyes of God." "Former wife," Rebecca said, finding a thread of steel in her voice that surprised her. "And God knows what you did to me." Thomas's expression darkened, and he took a step forward, one hand moving to the rope. "I am taking you back, Rebecca, one way or another. If you come peacefully, we can forget all this foolishness. If not, well, this town will learn what happens to women who abandon their duties." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what that rope meant. Thomas had always talked about justice, about punishment, about making examples. The threat was clear as the Wyoming sky above them. That was when Preston Wells stepped out of the saloon across the street. Rebecca had seen Preston around town since she had arrived. He was hard to miss, standing well over 6 feet with broad shoulders and a quiet confidence that drew the eye. He worked as a ranch hand for the Davidson spread just outside town, but he also helped the local sheriff on occasion, tracking down stolen cattle or escorting prisoners. He had kind eyes, a dark green that reminded her of pine forests, and a slow smile that he had offered her once or twice when their paths had crossed. She had always nodded politely and moved on, too afraid to let anyone close, too certain that her past would somehow destroy anything good she tried to build. Now, Preston walked into the middle of Main Street with the unhurried gait of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He wore dusty work clothes, a brown vest over a blue cotton shirt, and a gun belt that looked well worn and comfortable. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his tanned face was set in an expression of calm determination. "Afternoon," Preston said, stopping about 10 feet from where Thomas stood. I could not help but overhear your conversation. Seems to me the lady has made her position clear." Thomas turned to face this newcomer, his posture tensing. "This is family business, friend. Best you move along." "Would," Preston said, his voice easy but firm, "except I do not see any family here. I see a man threatening a woman who wants nothing to do with him. In this town, we tend to take issue with that sort of thing." "She is my wife," Thomas snarled, his hand moving closer to his gun. "Former wife, from what I heard," Preston corrected. "And even if she were not, she clearly does not want to go with you, so here is how this is going to work. You are going to get back on that horse, ride out of Buffalo, and never come back. If you do that, you get to leave with your dignity intact." Thomas's face flushed red with rage. "And if I do not?" Preston's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, a hardness that matched the threat in his voice. "Then you can try me." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Rebecca watched from the porch, her hands gripping the railing so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She wanted to call out, to tell Preston to be careful, that Thomas was dangerous, that he had killed a man in a bar fight back in Kansas and gotten away with it by claiming self-defense. But her voice was trapped in her throat, strangled by fear and something else, something that felt almost like hope. Thomas laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "You want to die for a woman you do not even know." "I know enough," Preston said. "I know she came here scared and built herself a decent life. I know she works hard and treats people with respect. I know she does not deserve to be hunted down by a man who cannot accept that she had every right to leave him. That is all I need to know." "You are making a mistake," Thomas said, his hand now hovering over his gun. "Could be," Preston agreed. "But I will live with it. Question is, will you?" For a long moment, the street was silent except for the hot wind that kicked up little dust devils between the two men. Rebecca could see the calculation in Thomas's eyes, the way he was weighing his options, trying to determine if he could outdraw this stranger. She knew Thomas was fast, had seen him practice for hours in their barn back in Kansas, shooting at targets until his hands were steady as stone. But Preston stood there like a mountain, unmoving, unafraid, and something in his stillness seemed to unnerve Thomas more than any amount of bluster would have. Finally, Thomas's gaze shifted back to Rebecca. "This is not over. You hear me, woman? You are my wife, and I will come back for you. No cowboy gunslinger is going to protect you forever." "She is not your wife," Preston said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "And if you come back to this town, if I even hear a whisper that you are within 100 miles of Buffalo, I will find you. And when I do, we will finish this conversation without words. Do you understand me?" Thomas's jaw clenched, his whole body vibrating with fury, but Rebecca could see the moment he made his decision. He was a bully, and bullies were fundamentally cowards when faced with someone who would not back down. He grabbed his horse's reins and swung himself into the saddle with more force than necessary. "You will regret this," he said, pointing at Preston. Then his gaze swung to Rebecca. "And you will pay for your sins, Rebecca. If not in this life, then the next." He wheeled his horse around and spurred it into a gallop, thundering out of town in a cloud of dust and rage. Rebecca watched until he disappeared beyond the buildings at the edge of Main Street, and only then did her legs give out. She sat down hard on the porch steps, her whole body shaking with reaction. Preston crossed the street to her, his long strides eating up the distance. When he reached her, he crouched down so their eyes were level, his expression gentle with concern. "You all right, Miss Harper?" She tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob. 3 years of holding herself together, of being strong, of never letting anyone see how frightened she still was, came crashing down in that moment. Tears streamed down her face, and she covered her mouth with her hand, embarrassed to be falling apart in front of this man who had just saved her life. "Hey now," Preston said softly. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch was gentle, reassuring. "You are safe. He is gone." "You do not understand," Rebecca gasped between sobs. "He meant what he said. He will come back. He always said he would kill me before he let me belong to anyone else, even if that anyone else was just myself." "Then I meant what I said too," Preston replied. "He comes back, I will be here. And I am not the only one. This is a good town, Miss Harper. People care about you. You think I did not see how Mrs. Chen was ready to grab a shotgun from inside that store? Or how Bill Tucker over at the hotel had his hand on his rifle? You are not alone in this." Rebecca looked up at him through her tears, seeing the truth in his green eyes. She had thought she had been invisible here, just another worker trying to make ends meet, but perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps community was something that grew quietly without announcement until the moment it was needed. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not stepped in." "Nothing good," Preston said honestly. "But that is not what happened, so no use dwelling on it. Can you stand? Let me help you inside, get you some water." She nodded, and he offered his hand. His palm was calloused from work, warm and solid, and when she placed her hand in his, she felt a jolt of something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Not just safety, though that was there, but connection, recognition. As if some part of her soul had been waiting for this moment, for this man, without her even realizing it. He helped her to her feet and guided her into the general store, where Mrs. Chen immediately took over, fussing and clucking like a worried hen. Preston stepped back, giving them space, but Rebecca found herself looking for him, not wanting him to leave. "I will be around," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Got to check in with Sheriff Morrison, let him know what happened. He will want to keep an extra watch tonight just in case. But I will come by later if that is all right, just to make sure you are settled." "Yes," Rebecca said quickly, then felt her cheeks flush. "I mean, that would be kind of you, thank you." He tipped his hat to her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, and then he was gone, his boots thudding on the wooden boardwalk as he headed toward the sheriff's office. Mrs. Chen pressed a cup of cool water into Rebecca's hands. "That Preston Wells is a good man, steady, honest. Not like some of these wild cowboys who come through town thinking they own the world." "I barely know him," Rebecca protested weakly. "You know enough," Mrs. Chen said, echoing Preston's earlier words. "You know he stepped between you and danger without a second thought. That tells you everything about a man's character." Rebecca sipped the water and tried to quiet her racing heart. Mrs. Chen was right, of course, but knowing Preston was a good man and allowing herself to trust him were two different things. Thomas had seemed charming once, back when they had courted in Kansas. He had brought her flowers, had spoken of building a future together, had promised to cherish her all their days. It was only after the wedding that his true nature had revealed itself, slowly at first, then with increasing brutality. She had learned the hard way that a man's public face and his private cruelty could exist side by side, and she had sworn she would never put herself in that position again. But Preston had not been performing for anyone's benefit. He had simply done what he thought was right, and there had been no artifice in his manner, no false bravado, just quiet strength and genuine concern. The afternoon passed slowly. Rebecca tried to focus on her work, helping Mrs. Chen organize inventory and serve customers, but her mind kept drifting back to the confrontation in the street. Every time someone entered the store, she flinched, half expecting to see Thomas standing there with that rope in his hands. Mrs. Chen noticed, of course, and kept up a steady stream of gentle conversation. talking about town gossip and the upcoming social dance and anything else that might distract Rebecca from her fear. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the door opened and Preston walked in. He had cleaned up, she noticed, washed the dust from his face and changed into a fresh shirt. He carried his hat in his hands, turning it nervously between his fingers. "Evening, Miss Harper, Mrs. Chen," he said politely. "I spoke with Sheriff Morrison. He is going to have a deputy keep watch near your boarding house tonight, just as a precaution. He also sent telegrams to the surrounding towns, letting them know to be on the lookout for a man matching your former husband's description. If he tries to circle back, we will know about it." "That is very thorough," Rebecca said, touched by how much effort had been put into ensuring her safety. "Please thank the sheriff for me." "You can thank him yourself," Preston said, "but I did not come here just to tell you that. I wondered if you might like some company walking home. I know it is still light out, but after today, well, I thought you might feel easier with someone beside you." Rebecca glanced at Mrs. Chen, who was trying very hard to look busy with a shelf of canned goods and failing spectacularly at hiding her encouraging smile. "I would appreciate that," Rebecca said. "Let me just get my things." She retrieved her small bag and the bonnet she wore to protect her face from the sun, then joined Preston at the door. Mrs. Chen waved them off with a knowing look that made Rebecca's cheeks warm again. They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments, their footsteps echoing on the boardwalk. Buffalo was a modest town, with a main street lined with the usual establishments. The general store, a hotel, 2 saloons, a church, a blacksmith, and various other businesses. Beyond the main street, houses and boarding establishments sprawled out in loose clusters, separated by empty lots and prairie grass. "I never properly introduced myself," Preston said as they walked. "Preston Wells. I work for the Davidson Ranch, mostly with the horses. Been in Buffalo about 2 years now." "Rebecca Harper," she replied, though she knew he already knew her name. "I have been here 3 years. I work for Mrs. Chen, and I also do some sewing and mending on the side." "You are good at it," Preston said. "I have seen some of your work." "Bill Tucker's wife, Martha. She wears a dress you made to church sometimes. Beautiful stitching." Rebecca felt a small glow of pride. She had always loved working with fabric, creating something beautiful from simple cloth and thread. It was one of the few things Thomas had never been able to take from her, because she had done it in secret, late at night when he was sleeping off his whiskey. "Thank you," she said. "It brings me peace, working with my hands like that." They turned off the main street onto the quieter road that led to the boarding house where Rebecca rented a small room. The buildings grew more sparse here, with larger stretches of open ground between them. The evening air was cooling, bringing relief from the day's heat, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Can I ask you something?" Preston said, his voice careful. "You do not have to answer if you do not want to." "All right," Rebecca said, bracing herself. "How did he find you? After 3 years, I mean. Buffalo is not exactly on the main routes." Rebecca had been wondering the same thing all afternoon. "I do not know for certain. I was so careful. I changed my name slightly, used my mother's maiden name instead of his. I never wrote to anyone from my old life. But I suppose if someone is determined enough, there are always ways. Maybe he hired someone to track me. Maybe it was just bad luck and someone who knew me saw me and mentioned it to the wrong person." She shook her head. "Does it matter? He found me." "That is what counts. It matters if there is a way to prevent it from happening again," Preston said. "Though I meant what I said earlier. He shows his face in Buffalo again, he will have more than just me to deal with." They had reached the boarding house, a two-story structure with a wide porch and cheerful yellow shutters. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, maintained a tidy, respectable establishment, and Rebecca had felt safe here until today. She turned to face Preston, the last rays of sunlight catching in his dark hair. "Why did you do it? Step in like that, I mean. You could have been killed." Preston was quiet for a moment, looking down at the hat in his hands. "My mother," he said finally. "She was married to a man like that before she married my father. My real father, I should say. The man before him, he used to hurt her. Beat her for any little thing, or for no reason at all except that he felt like it. One day, when I was about 5 years old, my father, the man who raised me, he witnessed one of those beatings. And he did not walk away. He stood between them, told that man he could either leave or face consequences. The man chose to fight, and my father defended himself and my mother. The man ended up leaving town, and my mother and father got married a year later." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "My father always told me that the measure of a man is not in how strong he is, but in how he uses that strength. You use it to protect people who cannot protect themselves, or you are just a bully with muscle. When I saw what was happening today, I thought about my mother and what my father did for her. I thought about what kind of man I want to be, and stepping aside, letting that happen, was not an option." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different from the ones she had shed earlier. These were born from gratitude and something deeper, something that felt like her heart was beginning to remember how to open. "Your father sounds like he was a wonderful man." "He was," Preston said, his voice warm with affection. "He passed 2 years ago. That is part of why I came to Wyoming. Needed a fresh start, a place where I could figure out who Preston Wells was without being in the shadow of who my father had been, as much as I loved him. Ended up at the Davidson Ranch, and it has been good to me." "I am sorry for your loss," Rebecca said softly. "Thank you. And I am sorry for what you have been through. No one deserves that." They stood there in the gathering darkness, and Rebecca found she did not want to go inside yet, did not want this moment to end. For the first time in years, she felt seen, truly seen, by someone who did not want anything from her except maybe her company. "Would you like to sit for a moment?" she asked, gesturing to the porch swing. "I do not have to be inside right away." "I would like that very much," Preston said. They settled onto the swing, keeping a respectable distance between them. Preston set his hat on his knee and they rocked gently, the chains creaking softly. From somewhere nearby, a dog barked, and farther away, someone was playing a fiddle, the melody drifting on the evening breeze. "Tell me about the ranch," Rebecca said. "What is it like working with the horses?" Preston's face lit up, and for the next hour, as the sky deepened to full dark and the stars emerged in their thousands, he told her about his work. He spoke about training young colts, about the satisfaction of earning a skittish horse's trust, about long days in the saddle checking fence lines and moving cattle. He spoke about the other ranch hands, about the Davidson family who owned the spread, about the harsh beauty of the Wyoming landscape. In turn, Rebecca found herself talking about her own work, about her dreams of maybe one day opening her own dress shop, about the books she loved to read when she could get her hands on them, about the simple pleasures she had discovered in this town that had become her sanctuary. It was the easiest conversation Rebecca had had in longer than she could remember. Preston listened like her words mattered, asked questions that showed he was genuinely interested, laughed at her small jokes, and shared his own stories with an openness that made her want to trust him. When Mrs. Patterson opened the door and pointedly cleared her throat, indicating that it was well past a proper hour for a young woman to be sitting on the porch with a gentleman. They both looked up in surprise, having lost track of time entirely. "I should let you get inside," Preston said, standing and offering his hand to help her up. "But if it is all right with you, I would like to call on you again. Maybe tomorrow, after I finish work, we could take a walk or just sit and talk like this." Rebecca's heart fluttered with nervousness and anticipation. The cautious part of her, the part that Thomas had created through years of abuse, screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself, to not let anyone close enough to hurt her again. But there was another part, smaller and quieter but growing stronger, that recognized something genuine in Preston Wells, something worth taking a risk for. "I would like that," she said, and was rewarded with a smile that made her knees weak. "Good night, Miss Harper," he said, putting his hat back on his head. "Good night, Mr. Wells, and thank you again for everything." He tipped his hat and walked away into the darkness, his figure gradually disappearing down the road. Rebecca stood on the porch, watching until she could no longer see him, then went inside to face Mrs. Patterson's curious questions and knowing looks. That night, Rebecca lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. She expected to be tormented by nightmares of Thomas, by fear of what might come. Instead, she found herself thinking about the way Preston's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands, the sound of his voice as he talked about the things he loved. For the first time in 3 years, Rebecca Harper allowed herself to imagine a future that held more than just survival. She imagined laughter and companionship, trust and affection, perhaps even love. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. The next day dawned bright and clear. Rebecca went about her usual routine, helping Mrs. Chen open the store and arrange the day's displays. Word of the previous day's confrontation had spread through town, as news always did in small communities, and several people stopped by specifically to check on her. The pastor's wife brought a basket of fresh bread. The blacksmith's daughter offered to walk with her anywhere she needed to go. Even gruff old Bill Tucker from the hotel made a point of telling her that anyone who bothered her would have to answer to half the town. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Rebecca had been so focused on keeping her head down and staying invisible that she had not realized how much she had become part of Buffalo's fabric. These people cared about her, not because of any grand gestures on her part, but simply because she was one of them, and they protected their own. Sheriff Morrison stopped by around midday. He was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Miss Harper," he said, removing his hat as he entered the store, "I wanted to update you on the situation. We have had no sign of Thomas Hendrick since yesterday. The telegrams have gone out, and law enforcement in the surrounding counties has been notified. I have also taken the liberty of contacting a judge friend of mine who confirmed that your divorce is legal and binding. If Hendrick makes any further trouble, he will be arrested for harassment and assault if he so much as threatens you." "Thank you, Sheriff," Rebecca said, feeling some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "I appreciate you taking this so seriously." "We take care of our own," Morrison said, echoing the sentiment Rebecca had heard from so many others. "And Preston Wells gave me a full account. That man stepped up when it counted. You have good people looking out for you." After he left, Mrs. Chen gave Rebecca a sly smile. "Speaking of Preston Wells, I noticed him escorting you home yesterday evening." "He was being kind," Rebecca protested, but she could not help the smile that tugged at her lips. "Hum," Mrs. Chen said knowingly. "That is a man who would not offer to walk just anyone home. Mark my words, Rebecca, he has intentions." "It is too soon," Rebecca said, but without conviction. "I am not ready for anything like that. The heart does not always wait until we are ready," Mrs. Chen said wisely. "Sometimes it just knows." The afternoon seemed to drag on forever. Rebecca found herself glancing at the clock repeatedly, anticipating the moment when Preston would finish his work and come to call on her. She scolded herself for acting like a schoolgirl, but that did not stop her from checking her reflection in every shiny surface she passed, making sure her hair was neat and her dress was not dusty. When Preston finally appeared in the doorway just as the sun was beginning its descent, Rebecca's heart did a foolish little leap. He had clearly made an effort, wearing what looked like his best shirt and with his hair freshly combed. He held his hat respectfully in his hands as he approached the counter. "Miss Harper," he said with that warm smile, "are you ready for that walk?" "Let me just get my bonnet," she said, trying to sound casual despite Mrs. Chen's barely suppressed giggle behind her. They set off down Main Street, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The evening was pleasant, with a light breeze that carried the scent of sage and prairie grass. Preston offered his arm after a moment's hesitation, and Rebecca took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath his sleeve. "How was your day?" Preston asked as they walked. "Busy," Rebecca said. "Half the town stopped by to check on me. I had no idea so many people cared." "Like I said, you are part of the community. People notice that kind of thing." He paused, then added, "How are you feeling? About yesterday, I mean." Rebecca considered the question carefully. Frightened still. Thomas was never good at letting go of things he considered his. But also grateful and strangely hopeful. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Preston said. They had reached the edge of town where a small stream ran through a grove of cottonwood trees. Someone had placed a bench there years ago, a spot where people could sit and enjoy the shade. "Mind if we sit for a bit?" They settled onto the bench and Preston turned slightly to face her. "I want to be honest with you about something, Miss Harper. Rebecca, if I may be so bold, please," she said, her pulse quickening. "I have noticed you since you arrived in Buffalo. You always seemed so self-contained, so careful, and I respected that. Figured you had your reasons. But I found myself looking for you when I came to town, wondering about you, hoping to maybe strike up a conversation but never quite finding the courage." He smiled ruefully. "Yesterday changed that. Life is too short to not take chances on things that matter. And I think you might matter quite a bit if you give me the opportunity to find out for certain." Rebecca's breath caught. Every instinct told her to run, to protect herself, to not give anyone the power to hurt her again. But when she looked into Preston's eyes, she did not see Thomas's cold calculation or barely restrained violence. She saw warmth and sincerity and vulnerability, a man offering his heart with no guarantee that she would not crush it. "I am afraid," she admitted quietly. "Not of you, but of being wrong again, of making the same mistake. Thomas seemed kind once before we married. I did not see the truth until it was too late." Preston nodded slowly. "That is fair. I cannot prove to you with words that I am different. All I can do is show you through my actions day by day until you feel safe enough to trust me. I am not asking for promises, Rebecca. I am just asking for the chance to be around you, to get to know you, and to let you get to know me. However long that takes, whatever pace feels right to you." The sincerity in his voice undid something tight in Rebecca's chest. Here was a man who understood that trust had to be earned, especially from someone whose trust had been so brutally broken. He was not rushing her, not demanding anything, just offering himself and waiting to see if she would meet him halfway. "I would like that," she said softly. "To take things slowly, to see where this might lead." The smile that spread across Preston's face was pure joy. "That is all I could ask for." They sat together as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. Preston told her about growing up in Montana, about his father's ranch and his mother's garden, about the younger sister who had married a shopkeeper in Helena, and now had 3 children of her own. Rebecca shared more about her life, carefully at first, then with growing confidence as Preston listened without judgment or pity, just compassion and interest. When they finally walked back to the boarding house, the sky was full of stars, and Rebecca felt lighter than she had in years. Over the following weeks, Preston became a regular fixture in Rebecca's life. He would stop by the general store during his lunch break, ostensibly to buy supplies, but really just to see her and exchange a few words. He began having dinner at the boarding house several nights a week, Mrs. Patterson having taken a liking to him and offering him a place at their table. He and Rebecca would take evening walks, exploring the areas around Buffalo, finding favorite spots where they could sit and talk. True to his word, Preston never pushed. He did not try to kiss her or hold her hand beyond offering his arm when they walked. He respected her boundaries and seemed content just to be in her presence, learning her moods and her stories, sharing his own. Rebecca found herself slowly, incrementally, letting her guard down. She noticed small things about Preston that reassured her. The way he was unfailingly polite to everyone, from Mrs. Chen to the stable boys. The way he helped an elderly man carry his purchases without being asked. The way he spoke about his mother and sister with such evident love and respect. The way he treated his horse, with patience and kindness even when the animal was being difficult. She also noticed the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and wonderful, like he could not quite believe his good fortune in being allowed near her. It made her feel beautiful in a way she had never experienced before, not for how she looked but for who she was. There were setbacks, moments when fear would grab her. Once, Preston reached out to brush something from her shoulder without warning, and she flinched so hard she nearly fell off the porch swing where they were sitting. He had immediately pulled back, apologizing, giving her space, and she had been grateful for his understanding even as she felt embarrassed by her reaction. "I am sorry," she had whispered. "I know you would not hurt me." "Do not apologize," Preston had said gently. "You have been through something terrible. Your mind and body are still learning that you are safe now. There is no shame in that." His patience and lack of judgment helped her more than any amount of reassurance could have. Slowly, over weeks that turned into months, Rebecca found that she flinched less, relaxed more. She began to anticipate Preston's visits with excitement rather than anxiety. She caught herself thinking about him at odd moments during the day, smiling at memories of things he had said or done. She was falling in love with him, and the realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Summer gave way to autumn, and the landscape around Buffalo transformed into shades of gold and orange. Preston helped the Davidson ranch prepare for winter, spending long days moving cattle to lower pastures and repairing buildings and fences. When he had free time, he spent it with Rebecca. One crisp October afternoon, Preston asked if she would like to ride out to the ranch with him. "I want you to see where I work," he said. "Meet the people I spend my days with, only if you are comfortable with it, though. I know being outside town might make you nervous." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Thomas had not been seen or heard from since that day in July. Part of her still expected him to reappear at any moment. But another part, the part that Preston was helping to heal, refused to let fear rule her life forever. They borrowed a small buggy from the livery, and Preston drove them out through the golden prairie toward the Davidson spread. The ranch was substantial, with a large main house, several barns, a bunkhouse for the hands, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in nearby pastures, and a string of horses stood in a corral, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. Preston introduced her to Mr. and Mrs. Davidson, a middle-aged couple who greeted her warmly. Mrs. Davidson immediately took a liking to Rebecca, especially when she learned about Rebecca's sewing skills. "Oh, you must make me a dress," Mrs. Davidson exclaimed. "I have a length of blue fabric I bought last year and have been too intimidated to attempt anything with it. Would you consider taking on the commission?" "I would be honored," Rebecca said, delighted. Preston showed her around the ranch, introducing her to the other hands, showing her the horses he was training, explaining the rhythms and routines of ranch life. His pride in his work was evident, and Rebecca loved seeing this side of him, competent and assured in his element. As they were walking back to the buggy, Preston's boss, Mr. Davidson, pulled him aside for a quick word. Rebecca waited by the buggy, enjoying the afternoon sun when Mrs. Davidson appeared beside her. "That man is in love with you," she said without preamble. Rebecca startled. Well, we have been spending time together, but—" "I have known Preston Wells for 2 years," Mrs. Davidson said kindly. "He is a good man, one of the best we have ever had working here, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Whatever happened to you before, whoever hurt you, Preston is not that man. Give him a chance. I think you will find he is worth it." "I think so too," Rebecca admitted quietly. The older woman patted her arm. "Good. You both deserve happiness." On the ride back to town, Preston was quieter than usual, and Rebecca wondered what Mr. Davidson had said to him. Finally, as they were approaching Buffalo, Preston cleared his throat. "Mr. Davidson offered me a permanent position today, not just as a ranch hand but as his foreman. The current foreman is retiring next spring and he wants me to take over." "Preston, that is wonderful," Rebecca exclaimed. "You must be so pleased." "I am," he said, but he still seemed uncertain about something. He pulled the buggy to a stop just outside town, on a small rise where they could see Buffalo spread out below them, smoke rising from chimneys as people prepared supper. "It comes with a house, small but decent, room for a family eventually, and a good salary enough to support." He trailed off, then took a breath and turned to face her fully. "Rebecca, I know we have been taking things slowly, and I do not want to rush you into anything, but I need you to know that when I think about my future, you are in it. Not just as someone I spend time with, but as my wife, my partner, the person I build a life with." Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest. "Preston, I am not asking you to answer right now," he continued quickly. "I know you need time, but I wanted you to know where my heart is. I love you, Rebecca Harper. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing on that porch, afraid but not broken, starting a new life despite everything you had been through. You are the strongest, kindest, most incredible woman I have ever known, and I would be honored to spend the rest of my life proving to you every day that you are loved and cherished and safe." Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks, but for once they were tears of joy. Something inside her, some last wall she had been holding on to, crumbled. This man, this good and patient and loving man, was offering her everything she had thought she could never have again. Home, partnership, love. "I love you too," she whispered, and watched his face transform with delight. "I have been afraid to say it, afraid to even feel it, but I do. I love you, Preston Wells." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. His lips met hers softly, reverently, as if she were something infinitely precious. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope, and when they pulled apart, both of them were smiling through tears. "I still need time," Rebecca said. "Before we talk about marriage, I mean. I want to be sure, for both our sakes." "Take all the time you need," Preston said, pressing his forehead to hers. "I am not going anywhere." As autumn deepened into early winter, their relationship continued to blossom. Now that they had acknowledged their love for each other, there was a new freedom between them. They could hold hands as they walked, steal kisses when no one was looking, make plans for a future that felt increasingly real. Preston began building furniture in his spare time, pieces he said were for the foreman's house he would move into in the spring. Rebecca found herself imagining where each piece would go, what curtains she might make for the windows, how she might arrange a home that would be theirs. It was late November when Thomas Hendrick returned. Rebecca was walking home from the general store just as twilight was falling, her arms full of fabric for a dress she was making for Mrs. Davidson. She had let her guard down over the months, lulled into a sense of safety by Preston's presence and the town's protection. So when Thomas stepped out from between two buildings, she was completely unprepared. "Hello, Rebecca," he said, and his voice was like ice water down her spine. She stopped, frozen, unable to make her legs work. He looked different, harder somehow, with several months' worth of trail dust and anger etched into his face. And he was armed more heavily than before, with 2 guns at his hips and a rifle slung across his back. "I told you I would come back," Thomas said, walking toward her slowly. "Did you think I was lying? Did you think your cowboy could protect you forever, Preston?" Rebecca managed to say, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Oh, I know all about Preston Wells," Thomas spat. "Been watching this town for weeks, learning everyone's routine. Right about now, your precious cowboy is helping move cattle into the winter pastures on the North Range. He will not be back until long after dark, and by then, you and I will be gone." Rebecca tried to scream, but Thomas moved fast, clamping a hand over her mouth and dragging her into the alley between the buildings. The fabric she had been carrying fell to the ground, bright blue against the dirt. She fought, kicking and clawing, but Thomas was stronger, and he had surprise on his side. "I should have done this months ago," he hissed in her ear as he wrestled her toward where a horse was waiting in the shadows. "But I wanted you to suffer first, wanted you to think you were safe, that you had gotten away, so you could know what it feels like to have it all ripped away." He started to lift her toward the saddle, and Rebecca knew that if he got her on that horse, she was dead. He would take her far from Buffalo, far from help, and she would disappear. No one would find her body. Preston would spend the rest of his life wondering what had happened, blaming himself for not being there. That thought gave her a surge of desperate strength. She bit down hard on Thomas's hand, tasting blood. He swore and loosened his grip just enough for her to break free. She stumbled forward, filling her lungs to scream. The sound that came out was raw and terrified, but it was loud. "Help! Somebody help me!" Thomas grabbed her again, his face contorted with rage, and she saw him reach for one of his guns. In that moment, Rebecca knew she was going to die. But at least she had made noise. At least someone might hear, might come, might tell Preston what had happened. Then a shot rang out and Thomas's hand froze. Another shot and Thomas staggered back, his eyes wide with shock. He looked down at his chest, where blood was beginning to bloom across his shirt, then collapsed to the ground. Rebecca whirled around to see Sheriff Morrison standing at the mouth of the alley, his gun still raised and smoking. Behind him were several townsmen, including Bill Tucker and the blacksmith, all armed. "I had a feeling he would come back," Morrison said grimly, lowering his weapon. "Been keeping extra patrols going, watching for strangers. Someone saw him lurking around town earlier and came to get me." He looked at Rebecca, his expression softening. "You all right, Miss Harper?" Rebecca sank to her knees, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Is he?" Morrison crouched beside Thomas, checking for a pulse. After a moment, he shook his head. "He is gone. Shot him through the heart. Had to, he was going for his gun and you were in the line of fire." Rebecca should have felt something, grief or guilt or horror. But all she felt was relief, vast and overwhelming. Thomas was dead. He could never hurt her again, never hunt her, never terrorize her in her dreams. It was over. Mrs. Chen arrived, having heard the commotion, and immediately wrapped Rebecca in her arms. Other townsfolk gathered, offering blankets and comfort and hot tea. Someone rode out to the Davidson ranch to fetch Preston. By the time Preston arrived, riding his horse hard and fast down Main Street, Rebecca was sitting in the sheriff's office with a blanket around her shoulders, drinking tea that Mrs. Chen kept refilling. He burst through the door, his face wild with fear, and when he saw her, alive and whole, he crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her. "Rebecca," he said hoarsely, taking her hands in his. "I thought. When they said Thomas was back, that he had grabbed you, I thought." "I am all right," she said, squeezing his hands. "Sheriff Morrison saved me. It is over, Preston. Thomas is dead. It is really over." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt him shaking. "I should have been here. I should have protected you." "You could not have known," Rebecca said. "And I am safe. The town protected me, just like you said they would." Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. "For what it is worth, Wells, I am glad you have been courting Miss Harper. Meant I had extra motivation to make sure she stayed safe. You are good for each other." Preston pulled back enough to look at Rebecca's face, his hands coming up to cup her cheeks. "Marry me," he said urgently. "I know I said I would give you time, and I meant it, but Rebecca, I love you and life is too short and too uncertain. Marry me. Let me spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know how loved and valued you are." Rebecca looked into his eyes, those beautiful green eyes that had shown her nothing but kindness and patience and devotion. The fear that had ruled her for so long was gone, burned away by Thomas's death and by the strength of what she felt for this man. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy on Preston's face was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. He kissed her, right there in the sheriff's office with half the town watching, and Rebecca kissed him back, putting every ounce of love and gratitude and hope she felt into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, the assembled townspeople burst into applause. Mrs. Chen was crying happy tears. Sheriff Morrison was grinning. And Rebecca felt, for the first time in her entire life, truly and completely safe. They were married 3 weeks later, on a bright December morning with snow sparkling on the ground. The whole town turned out for the wedding, which was held in the small church on Main Street. Rebecca wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Davidson had both helped with the veil, which had belonged to Mrs. Davidson's mother. Preston stood at the altar looking handsome and slightly nervous in his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving Rebecca as she walked down the aisle. There was no one to give her away, her own family long since estranged, but she did not need anyone. She walked on her own 2 feet, strong and certain, toward the man who loved her. The pastor spoke about love and commitment, about weathering storms together, about the blessing of finding your person in this vast and uncertain world. When it came time for the vows, Preston's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Rebecca for all his days. Rebecca's voice shook slightly, but not from fear, only from the overwhelming emotion of this moment. "I do," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and Preston kissed her, the church erupted in cheers. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, married, partners, ready to face whatever came next together. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Rebecca laughed more than she had in years, whirling around the floor in Preston's arms, accepting congratulations from what felt like every person in Wyoming. Mrs. Chen cried on her shoulder and told her how happy she was. Mr. and Mrs. Davidson gave them a beautiful set of dishes as a wedding present. Sheriff Morrison gruffly offered his congratulations and told Preston he had better take good care of his wife. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for the foreman's house that Mr. Davidson had let Preston move into early as a wedding present, Rebecca looked around at all the smiling faces, all the people who had become her family, her community, her home. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "All of you. You gave me a second chance at life, at happiness. I will never forget that." There was not a dry eye in the room. Preston carried her across the threshold of their new home, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the front room. The house was small but well built, with a bedroom, a kitchen, a front room, and a small room that could serve as an office or eventually a nursery. Preston had furnished it with the pieces he had been building, and Rebecca had made curtains and quilts and all the small touches that turned a house into a home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wells," Preston said, pulling her close. "Mrs. Wells," Rebecca repeated, trying out the name. "I like the sound of that." That night, Preston was gentle with her, patient and loving, understanding that intimacy was still new and sometimes frightening for her. He let her set the pace, stopping when she needed to stop, checking in, making sure she felt safe and loved. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was beautiful and healing in a way Rebecca had not known was possible. Afterward, lying in Preston's arms with her head on his chest and his fingers trailing through her hair, Rebecca felt tears slip down her cheeks. "What is wrong?" Preston asked immediately, concern coloring his voice. "Did I hurt you?" "No," Rebecca said, kissing his chest. "These are happy tears. I am just realizing that this is what it is supposed to be like. Love and gentleness and partnership. I spent so long thinking I was broken, that I was unworthy of anything good, but you showed me different. You showed me that I deserve to be loved well." Preston tightened his arms around her. "You do. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and I am going to spend every day trying to give it to you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, safe and loved and home. Their first year of marriage was marked by joy and adjustment and growing even deeper in love. Rebecca continued her sewing work, building up a solid clientele of women who appreciated her skill and artistry. She began to dream bigger, talking to Preston about maybe one day opening an actual shop in town. Preston thrived in his new role as foreman, earning the respect of the ranch hands and the continued trust of the Davidsons. They learned each other's rhythms and habits. Rebecca learned that Preston sang off-key in the morning when he was shaving, that he had a terrible sweet tooth, and would eat an entire pie if she let him, that he got quiet and contemplative when he was working through a problem. Preston learned that Rebecca needed time alone sometimes to recharge, that she loved reading before bed, that she made a face when she was concentrating on detailed stitching, that she was ticklish right below her ribs. They had their first fight about 6 months into their marriage, a silly argument about whether they could afford new breeding stock that escalated because both of them were tired and stressed. Rebecca ended up storming out to the barn, and Preston followed her 10 minutes later to apologize. They talked it through, learning how to disagree without it meaning the end of the world, how to communicate and compromise. Rebecca marveled at how different it was from her first marriage, where any disagreement had led to violence. With Preston, they could be angry and still safe, could argue and still love each other. Summer came again, hot and bright. Rebecca discovered she was pregnant in late July, almost exactly a year after Thomas had ridden into Buffalo with his rope. she told Preston over supper, nervous about how he would react. His response was to let out a whoop of joy, pick her up, and spin her around the kitchen while she laughed and told him to be careful. Then he set her down gently, as if she were made of glass, and kissed her with such tenderness that she cried. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, wonderstruck. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, even though the answer was written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Preston said. "Rebecca, you have given me everything. A home, a partnership, love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rebecca had some morning sickness in the early months, and Preston was attentive and worried, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her back, offering to do anything that might help. As she began to show, he would talk to her belly at night, telling their child stories about the ranch and the horses, about their mother who was the strongest woman in the world. The baby was due in early spring. As winter set in and Buffalo was blanketed in snow, Rebecca found herself nesting, arranging and rearranging the small room they had prepared as a nursery. Preston built a beautiful cradle out of oak, carved with delicate designs of horses and prairie flowers. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Davidson organized a baby shower, and Rebecca was showered with tiny clothes, blankets, and enough advice to fill a book. Their son was born on a cold March morning in 1878, after a labor that lasted through the night. The doctor and Mrs. Chen attended her, and Preston paced the front room, wearing a path in the floorboards. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst into the bedroom despite Mrs. Chen's protests about propriety. Rebecca was exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but she was smiling as she held a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. "Preston, come meet your son." He approached slowly, reverently, as if afraid this was a dream he might wake from. When he looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched and absolutely perfect, tears streamed down his face. "He is beautiful," Preston whispered. "You are amazing. I love you so much." "What should we name him?" Rebecca asked. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, never quite settling on one. But now, looking at their son, Preston said, "What about Samuel? It was my father's middle name." "Samuel Wells," Rebecca said, trying it out. "I love it. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world." Preston sat carefully on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Rebecca, the three of them forming a small, perfect circle. Their son, Samuel, made a snuffling sound and opened his eyes, dark blue and unfocused, looking between his parents as if trying to figure out who they were. "We are your mama and papa," Preston told him softly, "and we love you more than you can possibly imagine." Samuel yawned, unimpressed with this declaration, and Rebecca laughed through her tears. Parenthood was exhausting and wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, but he still needed constant attention, feeding and changing and soothing. Rebecca and Preston took turns walking him when he was fussy, both of them bleary-eyed and staggering through the early weeks. But they also marveled at every little thing he did. His first smile, the way he gripped Preston's finger with his whole tiny hand, the little sounds he made that were not quite words but seemed full of meaning. Preston proved to be a devoted father. He would come home from long days at the ranch and immediately take Samuel, walking him around the house, talking to him about the day, giving Rebecca a much-needed break. He changed diapers without complaint, heated bottles in the middle of the night, and sang lullabies in his terrible, off-key voice that somehow always made Samuel stop crying. "You are such a good father," Rebecca told him one evening as she watched him rock Samuel to sleep. "I had a good example," Preston said. "My father showed me what it meant to be a dad, To be present, to be patient, to love your family more than anything. I am just trying to live up to that." As Samuel grew from an infant to a chubby, active toddler, Rebecca's sewing business continued to flourish. She had so many commissions that she had to turn some away. Preston encouraged her to pursue her dream of opening a shop, and with Mr. Davidson's help, they managed to secure a small storefront on Main Street. Rebecca's dress shop opened in the spring of 1880, and it was an immediate success. Mrs. Chen helped her run the shop, the two women working side by side just like in the old days, except now Rebecca was the owner, the one making decisions and setting prices and designing beautiful dresses that women came from neighboring towns to purchase. It was hard work, balancing motherhood and business ownership, but Preston supported her completely, often bringing Samuel to the shop during the day so Rebecca could work and still see her son. They were happy, genuinely and completely happy. Buffalo had become more than just a refuge for Rebecca. It was home in the truest sense. She had a loving husband, a beautiful son, a successful business, and a community that embraced her. The scars of her first marriage faded, not forgotten but no longer defining her. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston took her back to the spot where he had first told her he loved her, that small rise overlooking Buffalo. It was a warm December day, unseasonably mild, and they left Samuel with Mrs. Chen for the afternoon. They sat on a blanket, looking down at the town that had given them both so much. Rebecca's shop was visible on Main Street, smoke rising from its chimney. Their house sat on the Davidson Ranch property, surrounded by corrals and pastures. It was a good life, an honest life, built on love and respect and partnership. "I have been thinking," Preston said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about how we got here, about that day 5 years ago when your former husband rode into town with a rope." Rebecca took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "The worst day of my life turned into the best day because it brought you into my life properly. You stood up for me when you did not have to. You fought for me, believed in me, loved me when I did not think I deserved love." "You always deserved love," Preston said firmly. "You just needed someone worthy of giving it to you." "I found him," Rebecca said, leaning against his shoulder. "That day in the street when you told Thomas to try you, I think something in me recognized that you were going to change my life." I was terrified, but also hopeful for the first time in years. "I was terrified too," Preston admitted. "Not of the fight, but of what might happen if I failed, if I could not protect you. The thought of you getting hurt, of that man taking you away, it was unbearable even though I barely knew you then." "You knew enough," Rebecca said, echoing what he had told her that day. "You saw someone who needed help and you helped. That is who you are, Preston Wells." "My hero, my husband, my love." He kissed her then, slow and deep, 5 years of love and life and partnership in that kiss. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "What do you think about giving Samuel a brother or sister?" Preston asked, his eyes twinkling. Rebecca laughed. "I think that sounds perfect." Their daughter, Emma, was born the following autumn, a tiny thing with her father's green eyes and her mother's dark hair. Samuel, now almost 4, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help with her care. The house was fuller, louder, messier, and absolutely perfect. As the years passed, Preston rose to become a partner in the Davidson Ranch, his hard work and integrity earning him a stake in the business. Rebecca's shop expanded, and she hired 2 seamstresses to help with the workload. Samuel started school and showed a talent for drawing, filling notebook after notebook with sketches of horses and prairie scenes. Emma was a whirlwind of energy, fearless and curious about everything. On a warm summer evening in 1885, Rebecca and Preston sat on their porch watching Samuel and Emma chase fireflies in the yard. Samuel was 9 now, tall and lanky, and Emma was 4, all wild curls and laughter. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Preston asked, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "Sometimes," Rebecca admitted. "If Thomas had succeeded in taking me that day, or if you had not stepped in. But then I remember that everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. The bad and the good, all of it led me here to you, to this life we have built." "I am grateful every day," Preston said. "For you, for our children, for this community. You know, my father used to say that a man's legacy is not in what he owns, but in the love he leaves behind." I think I understand what he meant now. Rebecca turned to look at him, at the man who had saved her life and then spent every day since making that life worth living. His hair had threads of gray now, lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. More than that, he was the kindest, the most steadfast, the most loving. "I love you," she said simply. "With everything I am, I love you." "And I love you," Preston replied. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." As darkness fell and the stars came out, they called the children inside. Samuel carried Emma on his back, both of them giggling, their faces flushed from running. They ate a simple supper together, the 4 of them around the kitchen table, talking about their days and making plans for the next day's adventures. After the children were in bed, Rebecca and Preston stood at their bedroom window, looking out at the prairie stretching endlessly under the starlight. Buffalo glowed softly in the distance, its windows lit with warm lamplight, smoke rising from chimneys. "Thank you," Rebecca said softly. "For what?" Preston asked, pulling her close. "For seeing me that day, for standing up for me, for loving me back to life. You gave me everything I thought I had lost forever. Home, safety, love, family. You gave me myself." Preston kissed the top of her head. "You did the same for me. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working hard but not really living. You taught me what it means to love someone so much that their happiness becomes more important than your own. You taught me about courage and resilience and grace. We saved each other." They stood together in the quiet of their bedroom, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the night sounds of the prairie and the soft breathing of their children in the next room. Outside, the world turned on, full of both beauty and danger, joy and sorrow. But here, in this house, in this moment, there was only peace and love and the profound gratitude of 2 people who had found each other against all odds. Rebecca thought back to that terrified woman who had fled Kansas with nothing, who had arrived in Buffalo broken and afraid, certain she would never be whole again. She thought about the day Thomas had ridden into town with his rope, intent on destruction, and how Preston Wells had stepped between them and said 2 words that changed everything. "Try me." Those words had been a challenge to Thomas, but they had also been a promise to Rebecca. "Try me, as in trust me, lean on me. Let me show you what love is supposed to be." And Preston had kept that promise every single day since. The legacy of that moment, of that choice to stand up and protect someone in need, rippled outward through the years. Samuel and Emma would grow up knowing what it meant to be loved well, to be protected, to be valued. They would carry that knowledge into their own lives, their own relationships, passing it down to their children and grandchildren. Rebecca's shop would continue to thrive, providing employment and beautiful clothing to women across Wyoming. Preston's partnership in the ranch would help it grow and prosper, providing jobs for dozens of families. But more than any of that, the love between Rebecca and Preston would become legend in Buffalo. People would tell the story for years to come. about the woman who escaped a terrible marriage and the cowboy who defended her in the street, about how they fell in love and built a beautiful life together. It would become a reminder that even in the hardest times, there was hope, that one person's courage could change everything, that love was worth fighting for. Years later, when Preston and Rebecca were old and gray, sitting on that same porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, they would still hold hands and exchange glances that spoke volumes. The young people in town would point to them as an example of what marriage should be, what partnership looked like, how love could endure and grow stronger with time. But on this night, in the summer of 1885, they were still young enough to dream, still building their legacy one day at a time. They climbed into bed together, Preston pulling Rebecca close, her head on his chest like it had been every night for almost 10 years. "Good night, my love," Preston murmured. "Good night," Rebecca replied, pressing a kiss to his chest right over his heart. They fell asleep like that, safe in each other's arms in their home in Buffalo, Wyoming, surrounded by the life they had built from ashes and hope, and the simple courage of one man who had seen injustice and decided to do something about it. The former husband, who had ridden into town with a rope intending to destroy, had instead set in motion a love story that would last a lifetime. The cowboy who had met him in the street and said, "Try me," had won far more than a confrontation. He had won a future, a family, a love that transcended the fear and pain of the past. And Rebecca Harper Wells, who had once believed she would never be free, who had thought she was broken beyond repair, had discovered that she was stronger than she ever imagined, capable of building a new life, of loving again, of choosing joy even after darkness. Together, Preston and Rebecca Wells became more than the sum of their individual stories. They became a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of standing up for what is right, and the transformative nature of love. Their life together was not perfect. There were still hard days, challenges to overcome, sorrows to weather, but they faced everything as partners, united in their commitment to each other and to the family they were creating. As the moon rose high over Buffalo and the prairie settled into the peaceful quiet of a summer night, the Wells family slept safely in their home. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new joys, new challenges. But they would face it together, as they always had, as they always would, bound by love that had been forged in fire and tested by time, a love that had proven itself worthy, a love that would endure for all their days and echo through generations to come, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most beautiful beginnings, and that courage, compassion, and love will always triumph over fear, hatred, and violence. The Wild West could be a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a place where new beginnings were possible, where people could reinvent themselves, where love could bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. Buffalo, Wyoming was just a small town on a vast frontier, but for Rebecca and Preston Wells, it was everything. It was where they had found each other, where they had built their life, where they had created a legacy of love that would outlast them both. And it all started with two simple words, spoken by a man brave enough to stand between danger and innocence, confident enough to face down a threat, compassionate enough to defend a stranger. Two words that changed two lives and created a family and became a legend. "Try me." Those words echoed through the years, inspiring others to be brave, to stand up, to protect the vulnerable, to choose love over fear. The story of Preston and Rebecca Wells became the story of Buffalo itself, woven into the fabric of the town, told and retold until it became myth and truth combined, a reminder of who they were and who they aspired to be. But for Preston and Rebecca, It was simply their life, the beautiful, ordinary, everyday miracle of loving and being loved, of raising children and building businesses and facing whatever came their way together. They did not think of themselves as legendary or inspiring. They just thought of themselves as lucky, grateful beyond words to have found each other in a vast and uncertain world. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened, Buffalo slept, secure and peaceful. The horses in the Davidson corrals dozed standing up. The cattle in the distant pastures lay in the grass. In the Wells house, Samuel rolled over in his sleep, dreaming of horses running wild across the prairie. Emma clutched her favorite doll and smiled in her dreams. And in the master bedroom, Preston and Rebecca slept wrapped in each other's arms, their breathing synchronized, their hearts beating in tandem. Two souls who had found their home in each other and would never be lost again. The end of the story, but really just the middle of a life, a love, a legacy that would continue for decades more, rich and full and beautiful, exactly as it was meant to be.